Welcome to Portals of Perception and to a new experiment we call Evolving Together. In this first Evolving Together, we bring the focus to the exploration of what it is that we are endeavoring to discover here and to what holds us humans back. So I'm here with two friends, Nigel and Well, each with their own unique PhD. PhD stands in this case for Personal Human Development Journey. And we initially met some 3 years ago independently and discovered that we are exploring along similar and adjacent inquiry lines about how we humans evolve and how we evolve together. Nigel, well, welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aviv.
Well, so let me offer a very brief starter to get us going and then invite you to speak to what brings you into this exploration so we can begin to construct the evolving together playground. That's the intent, to actually build a playground that will allow us to explore. Well, the central Portals inquiry is about the future and about how we humans evolve together. So this is right inside this vein. And again, today we hope to begin to frame what it is we're seeking to develop and what it is that we are bringing online inside the broader inquiry of evolving together. And again, what is holding us back? So before we launch into all that, what would you say by way of bringing your voice to begin this that brings you to this exploration today, please?
Okay, well, I would say firstly that I'm a human being in my complex, in my systems. I'm here. I'm a result of, by all accounts, some 4,000 million years of an evolving process on this planet, at the leading edge of the evolution of life, looking out through these eyes that have given me this opportunity. So that's the first thing. Organically, that's what I'm sitting inside of. And then the second thing is my own individual life, my own self-rising journey, and where that has taken me. And I had a very potent experience early in my journey where I kind of met a signal that switched me on. And it switched me on to the whole idea of being a part of evolution and playing a part in evolution, consciously playing a part in it. So that turned on in me. And I was very grateful for that because I'd been looking in the world and thinking, well, where do I fit in this place? And I hadn't really found where I fitted. But I felt I fitted in playing a part in that bigger process. So that was important, and the beginning of a journey I've been making ever since, which took me very quickly into the issue of what can happen when human beings meet each other. Because that initial experience came through meeting another human being and what passed between us. So it started in that way and it's continued in that way ever since, in opening up what's possible when we get together to address the whole issue of evolution, evolving together effectively.
Well, so, staying with you just for an extra moment, to what else would you say to describe, to characterize this which you are describing as a signal or being awakened to the sense of evolution? What else can you say just to give it a little more fully embodied sense of how it appeared in your life in the first place? And
Yeah, it was a very extraordinary experience. It was almost like a light had been switched on in the room, and suddenly I was aware of everything that was in the room. It wasn't a learning experience. It was a becoming conscious experience of what was already there. You know, that was the nature of it. But it was very far-reaching. It also gave me an awareness that we were in a time of change, epoch change, I would describe it, but not as an academic thing, but as a felt experience. So I knew it, you know, deeply knew it. I knew I had a part to play in it. And this was all happening upon me in a fraction of a second. So it was quite seismic as an experience. Very strange as well, because it was an incredibly intimate experience. It was like being so close with another human being that you were almost them and they were almost you. But at the same time, it was totally impersonal. There was no sense that it was about us personally. It was something that was coming in and making itself known. So it was a very powerful experience.
Perhaps just a third furthering of this, and then we'll invite Nigel. So that awareness, as you said, switched on in you almost in a brief second. And what happened then? Where did that inner awareness and presence?
Well, I started looking for, if you like, evidence of it having turned up in the world. So I looked in literature, I looked in philosophies, all different kinds. I looked in religion, because there was also the sense that, you know, I'd never considered myself to be a religious person. But in that moment, a very organic sense of religion turned up in me. So all of this needed to be looked at. So I started to make that exploration. And also, I was always on the outlook from then on for other people who might know a bit about this as well, or might have felt it as well, and for the kind of dialogues we could get into together. So that it caused that awareness in me. And I started to meet these people, sometimes in extraordinary circumstances, because I was carrying something and they were carrying something, and we got together along the road, you know. So it was a whole journey that began at that point.
Right, and we're here to continue this journey in evolving together.
Another part of a journey.
That's right. Thank you. So Nigel, please, what would you say to bring
Yeah.
this?
Well, on my own journey of spiritual inquiry, personal development, there's been a growing kind of enigma as to, when we use the term human, does that refer to the race or the species or the individual? Because it seems like alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. And you can see this out in the world with, you know, massive civil engineering projects. It needs thousands of people, and it feels like that we're each seeds or champions of humanity. But over the last, I don't know, 15 years, there's been a growing awareness that in dealing with another, sometimes it's like things happen that allow us to magnify each other and ourselves in it. And it feels that the personal development journey is a preparation for a further development in that happens in collectivities, whether it's family, society, country. And for some reason, that's been instinctively growing in me, that we need to come together, because in the coming together, it reveals the struggles and the difficulties and the possible development beyond that. So it's like, just in meeting with another, I find a new part of myself. So it suggests that that could possibly happen with every member of the human race. And then maybe I'll know myself. And I might think I know myself at the moment, but it feels like that's just a mental appreciation. And that, in the way of musicians, when we come together, in the live experience of it, we will discover more about ourselves individually as well.
So you are describing something rather magical. For some, it will sound completely, really magical. In another meaning of the word magical. What you're describing, first of all, is the curious juxtaposition of the personal discovery, personal development journey, and how in the face of the broader prospect of the opportunity of life and the challenges and opportunities for us on this planet, something else happens when we come together in small and in larger groups of people to work on projects. And the unique phenomenon that you are describing is that actually when you meet another person, there is a way in which the meeting reveals to you a part of you that you didn't know was there. And potentially you're saying that could happen with any person where that degree of openness or intimacy or trust can be developed, such that we are truly carrying the potential of each other in ways that we don't even most of the time appreciate or understand.
Yes, yes. And inside of it, I realize psychologies are really important. And in the West, we've got this psychology that we are individual, and when we come together, it's like putting blocks together. But when I traveled to Africa, I came across this word Ubuntu, which means something, I don't think we've got a literal translation, but it's something like I am because we are. And in the deep feeling of myself, it feels like that we do have a deep connection that all comes from the same source. But we are separate carnal beings.
One way I contemplate the vision that you are beginning to paint there is that when we look at the human system, if we took out the liver and the lungs and the spleen and put them all on separate from each other and then try to put them back together, we will never get back together the human system because they're actually interconnected and interrelated and are continually signaling and regulating each other with the entire inner lives, energetic and biophysical and so on and so forth. And in the way that you're describing, which I sometimes will use the term flying upside down, there is a way in which we could view humanity in a similar vein. And you're saying the enculturation of the Western world largely and the last, depends how we want to trace it, 2,000 years or more, and we will at some point here do a brief tracing, accentuated very much the separate, individuated picture. And there is a below-the-line dimension to it. I will also argue that that was actually necessary to facilitate a certain evolutionary surge, and that the new we that we are now seeking and sensing emerging in recent decades is a rather post-individuation we rather than a pre-individuation we. And I'll trace that in a minute, but this is what I'm hearing in the suggestion that you're saying, well, we actually need to discover in a new way, to get naturalized in a new way, to be at a point where we can come together and not feel that we need to defend against anybody putting us in a box, because so much of the industrialized, commercialized modernity project did this to us, and rather see that we can be together and free. And again, the sense of the inquiry and how I come into evolving together is very much exploring the evolving together from a place of having been individuated and discovered our own agency, our own sovereignty, our own sense of, I suppose you could call it agentic inquiry.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Did I add in a small point here, Aviv?
Please, please.
One of the things I've found in studying evolution, the process of evolution, is that fundamentally it's an integrating process. So if you look over the millions of years, it's like many things have come together. You had a state a long, long time ago where there were single cells. And then single cells found a way to come together and cooperate. And the whole trace is one of integration. And we're the result of that integrating process, the body of the human at least. So what is to say that the future will not continue along a similar line, which gives substantia to what you're now saying, because it may well be that we as human beings are in an integrating process. Firstly, having to find ourselves, and then finding each other in the greater picture of what we are meant to be as evolving, or as parts of the evolving future, So it makes a lot of sense against that background.
Nigel, please, anything you want to put here at this point, or I'm going to begin to produce the next scaffolds for us into the conversation.
No, I think I'm clear to move on.
Yeah, so here is how I would put the inquiry we are pursuing inside an even a larger picture, to give us the freedom to go deeper on the lines that we are already beginning to seed with what you both offered. There are many smart people all over the planet who are commenting about the future of technology, for example, and how it will evolve and shift, and the risks and opportunities of GPT-10, GPT-16, GPT-27, whenever those arrive. And there are smart people commenting about geopolitics, about the economy, and how they will evolve in the future. And there are some fascinating explorations about what we all must do to avert several self-eliminating scenarios. And what will the sustainable energy of the future be? And what will we humans eat for breakfast and lunch and dinner in the future? All those inquiries, including, well, what is the government that will evolve as we are now seeing the particular model of liberal democracies that evolved over the last few centuries struggling to adapt? How will they adapt or evolve? And all those inquiries are in the mix, including how should and how will education develop. So in Portals, we are interested in all these conversations. Today, however, we are inquiring and sensing into the evolution of the interior the mutualized, the collective interior. There is a sense in which there is a significance about how we humans evolve when we come together as groups, as teams, as families, as small and large organizations, or any other formats emerging at this time, with the mindfulness that there may be new formats that will enable us to come together to collaborate in the future. And the specific inquiry that I'm framing for us for today is I'm asking, how do we help each other? And also, how do we stop each other and prevent each other from what we can evolve into? So the moment we frame these questions, we begin to describe the bifurcation of what I sometimes describe as the below-the-line human expression and the above-the-line expression and possibility. And the suggestion is that each contains vast and broad natures and dimensions, and that what we mean when we talk about the above the line, this is indeed where we help each other unlock possibilities and potential. And what we describe as the below the line, this is where we indeed block and prevent and stifle each other from the greater possibilities of life and development. So today, we are in a way seeking to, at least in part, ground ourselves in some of the problem, having planted some seeds in the opening about where we hope to go. And so therefore we are asking, and we'll be asking, what are the barriers and what's standing in our way, and so on, and all of which is leading to the above the line inquiry about what is possible, as you both hinted to, in terms of our growth, our evolution as individuals, inside with families, with communities, with groups of people who come together and have this acute awareness that, very much the way you were describing, well, there was something that was awakening you, you recognized something about yourself, and you immediately identified, probably even before you consciously fully translated it, the sense that there is something unique about you being in that awareness about yourself, and that at the same time there was something completely impersonal about it, and it was to do with the larger human family, humanity. So I am offering these scaffolds of the above the line and the below the line inquiry. What would you want to contribute at this point, as we just really still constructing the playground inside of which we can discover those spaces that we are suggesting and inviting?
Well, it's a very interesting beginning, Aviv, because one of the things that turns up in me is how deep, how intimate, how close in can people get to each other, and what happens in the process of that. Because when we go deeper and connect deeper, then much more becomes possible. But most of the time, in my experience, people don't, in reality, they don't meet at all. They bounce off each other, or they discuss some third-party subject which they're not involved in. So there isn't really a meeting at all. And then as you move gradually deeper, it begins to be the case that one life starts to feel and respond to another. And as that happens, all sorts of things get interested, because it becomes a progressive process at that point.
It becomes
a progressive process at that point. It's offering something in a value-added way to the journey of life. And at that point, it becomes of interest, not just to the people involved, but perhaps to life itself, where life itself is trying to go. It's a deep thing. So I've always become, my journey has made me very aware of this and very wishing for it to go on. So I'm always looking for opportunities to find ways to go deeper, to open it up, to make more possible when human beings meet. And I think also, I would say about these times that the possibility of that seems to be magnifying and growing and deepening as a trend. And that is quite hopeful.
And we want to further open both premises you offered. What is it that creates this scenario that you're describing? As a lot of the time when human beings meet, they don't actually meet. They bounce from each other. And sometimes, even when they think they meet, they don't actually meet, but rather they meet a construct that they each put outside of themselves.
Yes.
And we're actually trying to bypass and release this catch even as we speak here. And part of it is the sense of relaxing into being ourselves and releasing the performative inclination that always happens when you know you're recording and you're going to be sharing on YouTube. And because part of the sense I have when you speak about that sense of getting into the deeper part of possibility where human beings become more malleable, warmer, softer, well, more fully embodied. Because another one of the byproducts of this time is we can talk conceptually, and the concepts may be attractive and scintillating, but we are always at the risk of losing the sense of the whole human that we each are, and it become a scenario of disembodied heads speaking to each other. We're trying very much in portals to avoid that, even at the risk of slowing down sometimes the conversation to a point that it may be less of a YouTube attraction because the speed is not of the TikTok kind, but nevertheless will facilitate the natures, the feelings, the inner processes that will inform ourselves and each other and whoever comes along for the ride with us, that they can listen in and through these deeper parts of themselves.
Yeah, it's curious that you say that, because I was thinking earlier that, this process is entitled Portals of Perception. I think it can also be portals of connection, which in a way is a deeper, warmer process going on, where we start to melt and come together inside a deeper construct, not just a mental construct. And I would hope we can do that.
I do hope that very much. I hope we open portals of perception, portals of connection, and portals of evolutionary possibility and embodied realization and all of the above. So indeed, Nigel, what would you want to bring into this now?
Yeah. One thing that's come up is how I think about meeting others. Because firstly, we meet on the outside. And there's a validity in that, in the way that our senses look outward. So often another will see more about me than maybe I see about myself. So in the reflection, there is great assistance possible. But one thing I'm currently discovering, and over the last few years, is in those that I spend time with, meeting on the outside, they become to live in me as well. So it's like I carry those companions in me and I feel that as increasing stability in me. Because as they live in me, I also live in those. And it's a bit like guy ropes on a tent. It's like, while I may be having a hissy fit, they're not. And they're holding my life still. So I'm realizing there's way more to this of life meeting life. And I'm very aware that, as you indicated earlier on, the power of life comes through the wholeness and then trickles into the individual parts in the way that our body works. It needs to be all together for each of the organs and then each of the cells and so on to get their nutrifying force. And then what does that say about a collective of people? Especially if I'm living in them and they're living in me. Does that allow more of the life force to come through? And the evidence in me says, yes, it does. And I mean, one experience from probably about 10 years ago now is meeting with others. And at one point, one man stood up and said he only wanted to be with friends in the circle. And something in me said, what is he on about? You know, and then, so we asked him and he spoke. And in the circle, there was another man who he had a difficulty with 20 or 25 years ago. And something in me went, this is dodgy. But because the circle held in that each person was holding the best of those people there, within a very short time, they could get to the point of shaking hands. And a split of 25 years experience was healed in the moment. And I'd never seen anything like that. And it to me, it speaks volumes of, you know, it's clearly we live in a divided world, but with a slight change of attitude in us, those divisions do not need to propagate further.
So you are now describing the miraculous nature of healing and transformation that can take place when we humans cultivate that kind of ecology with each other that's open, that's trusting, and that invites what we are describing here as the above the line possibility of human beings coming together.
Yes, because it's clear that we all carry trauma from former years, which can unfortunately lead to us carrying a suspicion about all humans. Because we've had difficulty with just a few humans, we then almost like put on a suit of armor in what we think is possible with others. But as you say, that it is possible with committed companions to rise above that suspicion that seems to be a scar in the world, really.
Well, so let's try and put this early exploration again inside the epochal trace and its context for a minute. And also put it in context of how you framed, Nigel. There is something to always learn about by the design. We're talking here about evolving together, and yet, as well as you started, you said, I'm sitting inside a human body, a human system, that unto itself is complete. And is self-governing to the degree that it has agency in that you can choose to get up and go and do whatever it is you choose to do. And that is something we are each given complete agency for, independently of another human. And yet we are seeking this conundrum of preserving or even magnifying or even liberating more that potential, such that it reaches a point where we find ourselves inside an evolutionary we, which we sense is some of the important pathways to explore the future. And so, well, if for no other reason, because A, we cannot get into the future on our own, and B, if we're not going to work together, we're going to likely blow up this world even faster. So it is that inquiry that brings up in me the need to take for a moment, a long arc retrospective view where evolutionary biologists, and I suppose you could call them deep anthropological historians, will tell us and are telling us that we came to dominate this beautiful place we call Earth and won the competition for primacy because we were more adaptive and able to collaborate and create coordinated action. Such the story goes. And that we were better in caring and in sharing and in practicing fairness. Now, by the way, you wouldn't know it unnecessarily today when you look at us in some places around the world, at least not always. We, however, claim, and what brings us into this exploration is the sense that yes, there is actually significant new potential that's arising. And so when we look at this arc of time, there is the evidence of what occurred with hunter-gatherer tribal societies. And there are some wonderful elements in the way of that operating system that governed human life for many, many, many thousands of years. I do often get the feeling that we tend to a little bit romanticize that time and forget to remember that a huge big part of it was about subsistence, and that life could actually be quite rough. So that's that phase. And then you can say that those tribal societies, they're overtaken by large agrarian projects and agrarian societies, which is where few things begin to happen. People begin to be seen and treated as units of agrarian production. And also somebody begins to rise in the pecking order and the hierarchy, because now because we are able to produce more food, we need to protect the food, and you have a beginning of a command and control structure that you didn't need to necessarily give rise to in the smaller clans and tribal societies. And you now whoosh through time and you get into the more structured feudal system. And you could say that some of the earlier barbaric, animalistic, kill and be killed operating system is supposedly partly sublimated, only partly because it is actually replaced with a very oppressive system that offers some degree of survival assurance and often is as cruel and as barbaric as what was before. And then you can say, and I'm really abbreviating dramatically the rush through time, the rise of traditional societies that emerge into through the Renaissance and into the 16th century and so on and so forth, where we now enshrine and celebrate more of the place of community, but very much inside a traditional context where there is prime hierarchy, it's largely patriarchal, and there is still tremendous limitation and suppression of free choice and free expression by large institutional religions and large structures. And the individuation that we describe really is given birth to through not just the scientific revolution and then the industrial revolution and the opening of the economical structure for more of an entrepreneurial permission. But all of that then leads to a more gradually atomistic structure, first of the family and then of individuals. So that is really what brings us into how it is expressed in the modernity project, where we have large-scale organizations of people working together to produce, as you said, Nigel, some of the miracles of modern civil engineering in the constructions of cities and all the other wonderful infrastructure that, sometimes I sit in a large airport and I just give myself permission to step back and not be familiar, not take for granted the extraordinary engineering project of so many people coming from so many different places and embarking on the next destinations, and how it is all coordinated and all the computerized systems that support this. It's an amazing marvel, and we get irritated from the security lines and forget to remember how extraordinary is the modernity project in that it allowed us all that. And yet we are in this conversation seeking to recognize that what that did, it took the power and the primacy of life and very much placed it on the outside of ourselves, which was a necessary evolutionary stage. And we are engaged here in the conversation that in some way you could say emerged through postmodernity, because what postmodernity came to do was it said, well, let me break away from everything that traditional patriarchal structure created and the pecking order that we even still saw in the modern world. Let's do away with all this and liberate me, the individual. So that was a necessary phase on the way to reclaiming some of the interior dimension of life, because what modernity has been very successful, but it sucked the life out of the interior and placed a significance on the power structure outside of the person in technology, in physical structures, and in human structures. And what we are saying is we are seeking to find a way to not have to destroy it all, but recognize that a lot of it is on a self-eliminating trajectory in the way that we have developed an extractive economy that suck the life out of us as individuals, and we are seeking to rediscover a way of being with each other where we recognize, number one, that the mindset that technology will solve all our problems is false. That's number one. Number two, that technology, though it has been very rich and successful and connected us in new ways, such that it allows us to speak over this platform now, in other ways, it also separated us and propagated even a larger, more dominant loneliness. There is a word I forget how to pronounce now in Japanese that describe how old age, sometimes in Japan, old age people are so lonely such that nobody knows that they die, and they are found only weeks and months later. That there is a word for that. That would never happen in tribal societies. But then tribal societies, for their survival, will sometimes leave the old person outside the tribe because that was part of. So that's where I say we sometimes romanticize the way of those ancient tribal structures. So what we are, I believe, exploring, and what brings us into this conversation, is the sense that, as Einstein said, some of the solutions cannot be found at the level of the problems that we've created. And what we are seeking is to find some of the solutions in those interior dimensions that are now coming online, that we can reintegrate, as you said, well, reintegrate as part of the evolutionary process, such that we can honor this epochal trace, where we were thrown out of the imaginary Garden of Eden that never really fully existed there, perhaps, to discover our individual selves, to now reintegrate in a new quality of we, a we that I'm suggesting is not pre-individuation, but post-individuation. So much of the we, so much of this new evolutionary emergent we, will involve the work of recognizing how we block each other, how we historically been injurious with each other. How do we release and heal those dimensions? How do we protect the best of each other? How do we support that such that indeed that evolutionary prospect is there, because there is every instinct in our ancestral DNA that wants to bring online every other second some protective measure, because we've learned to be so afraid of each other. So I just put this entire trace on the table for you to play jazz with and do with it whatever you want to do with it, please.
Okay. I mean, it raises a couple of things. It seems like hierarchy is natural to planetary life. The law of the jungle and the hierarchy of feeding upon each other. But I feel that, and in schools at the moment, I know that my granddaughter at school is being taught that humans are animals, which bothers me. Because the evidence of my studies is that there is a higher possibility, maybe called pentagrammic. And because it's pretty clear to me that there is a feature in humans that distances us from the whole substructure that supports us. And part of that is choice and thinking. And inside that hierarchical view, it's like, yeah, the nature of the planet, it just repeats itself. And there are some people that have said to me that there's always been war, so there always will be war. But the fact that we have choice says we don't need to be subject to history in the ways we go on. And maybe if we were to exercise that choice, and agree in that choice with each other, a different future could be facilitated. That's...
Anything you want to build on this or speak to any other aspect of the trace, please, Well?
Yeah, I was just going to say a very simple thing, really, that if you look at the two words, react, which clearly says doing something again that's been done before, and mostly is an automatic process. And the word response, which is very different and tends to have some element of consideration inside it. Now, if you look at the defense systems, by their very nature, they are designed to preempt attack. And they need to work fast and actually block attack, preferably, before it happens. So they're based very much in reaction. And as we've already identified, there is so much in us that is set up that way, that mostly we go on an automatic process of defending even when we don't need to, rather than actually considering and responding and going deeper. So I just think it's important to recognize that fact. And that if we're going to get past that, we need to begin to have more of a focus on how we respond and deal with some of the reactive patterns in us by being a little bit more conscious about them and asking ourselves, does that actually fit? Is that needed in reality? Because often it isn't. Often it's a redundant pattern that just gets in the way and causes us a lot of trouble and prevents things.
So you are each in your own way describing a process where humans, the human capacity to transcend the animalistic, reactive nature that is part of our DNA, part of our historic formation, is accessed and can be accessed through choice, through relaxing the nervous system and regulating to a point that we don't need to react from a historic pattern. What else would you first say to this pivot of being arrested in an older animalistic operating system and giving rise to the different possibility of response? What else would you say to this pivot? And then I actually want us still today to get a little deeper into the conditioning that holds us back. But first, because you each frame this pivot, please.
Well, I could say something about it that I find very, very interesting and compelling. And that is that this reactive process, this reactive pattern, and the automatic nature of it mirrors the way that pretty much everything has gone on up until this point. And then suddenly you've got a form of life appearing on the scene that has access to another possibility and can, for example, have consideration, can have care, can have compassion, can have patience, can take into account what another life is feeling and what is going through them. And that strikes me as an enormous evolutionary leap. It opens the door to a non-automatic future, which is quite an extraordinary thing. And it all sits on the fact that we are able to choose. Yeah, and we're at a point in evolution where we can go forward together in that finer matrix of possibility, or sink back into our ancient roots, which will cause us to attack each other. I think it's very significant.
Yes, yes, as well indicated, the struggle in overcoming the reactions is the inbuilt speed of reaction. And the story from my own life is when I was nearly 1 year old, I got sent off to hospital on my own, because that's how it worked back then. And it caused such a panic in me that my family was not around. Suddenly they were no longer there. And just that experience caused me to demonstrate the symptoms of asthma ever after. And I tried over many years to kind of overcome that reaction of the closing of the throat. And I couldn't do it until I found the family that I was describing earlier on, that I carried inside, that allowed me to overwrite the print of the trauma of not being supported by a family. And somehow it suggests to me that we're designed to function in organic families, in the healing of the individuals who are participant in that family. And it takes a repetitive kind of programming to put in place a different response, because the speed of the automatic response is so fast.
Well, so there are three dimensions, Nigel, in the story. You offered for me three dimensions. One is the recognition of speeds and how so much of what we're describing as below the line animalistic reactive nature is to do with fast speed. And oh, by the way, the problem of this post-modern world, that it is so fast and so quick. And indeed, some of what we are describing may require us to slow down. So there is that recognition in your story. The second element I harvest from your story and experience is the profound nature of healing that can take place later in life. Sometimes people will seek that deliberately through various therapy modalities. You're describing, which for me is the third nature of element in the story, you're describing a circumstance where you were able to create a new kind of family. And that's partly the significance we are exploring here, the sense that we're each born into a family by bloodline, and then we can choose to create a new family. Now, oftentimes, the new family we choose to create is indeed the new family we build, or we may even choose the new family to be the family we were born into when we embark on a journey that enables us to give birth to a new operating system. The demarcation, the subtle demarcation that I hear in what you're describing is that it is possible for us humans to find early in life or later in life circles of friendship, crews of connected endeavor, pods of development together, whatever you describe them in. Sometimes it actually happens around a sport endeavor. Sometimes it happens in the professional work space. Sometimes it happens around a body of work or around a spiritual or developmental journey. There are groups and circles. Sometimes they involve the residential community setup. Sometimes they are virtual spread all over the planet, and they are actually seeking to consecrate and to discover and consecrate a new we. And you're describing that in that mutual space, communal space, there is a conductive healing presence that can unlock and release so much of the trauma built by earlier conditioning.
There's another interesting aspect to this as well, I'd like to bring in, because when we think of human families or human relationships, there is the element of something that is built that is long-lasting. And that obviously is very important. But there's also the element of exchange and what can happen sometimes, where all that is needed is an exchange between lives that can go very deep and can be very significant, even life-changing, and in a sense continues to live in you long after the actual meeting has passed by. So I think there's a tremendous richness in the many ways in which human beings can meet and exchange. And we need, in a sense, to have a different view about the way we go through life and value the brief and important things as well as the long-lasting and enduring things. And I think the thing I'd highlight in all of this is the willingness to not possess life, not to possess each other, not to possess ourselves even, but to be a bit more open to the fact that life is a flow. And that, you're going to flow through your experiences and meet others on the way. And some of that will be enduring and some of that will be short-lived. But the important thing is, does it promote and deepen the whole experience of living and progress the evolutionary process we're talking about?
Living in a way that liberates rather than arrests and possesses life, and treating ourselves and each other from that place of possibility. And my intuition is actually right now to conclude this introductory conversation here and pick up immediately on the other side and do part 2 that we thought was going to be integrated to part 1, make it a separate recording. So how about if we press pause here, Well and Nigel, and pick up part 2 where we go deeper into the what holds us back, because there is something in what we're just touching that we would want to leave for this conversation. How about that as a plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Well, thank you for this first Evolving Together. Come join us to see the continuation of this conversation in part 2, Evolving Together, part 2. See you soon. Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.